Nathan Scott, a Marine veteran, was checking a vacant rental cabin in Wyoming just before a snowstorm hit. He thought it was just a simple chore until his GSD Echo suddenly barked frantically, clawing desperately at the front door. Nathan pushed the door open. It was unlocked inside in the deadly cold. He found a young woman shivering, sitting in a broken wheelchair. She claimed her fiancé had abandoned her. But as the storm howled outside, Nathan realized something far more dangerous than the weather was right there in that room with him. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The wind in this part of Wyoming didn't just blow. It scraped the high plains clean and whistled through the pines of the Wind River Range with a sound like a distant warning. Nathan Scott felt the change in pressure before he saw it. He stood on the porch of his isolated cabin, hands braced on the railing. He was a tall man built with the lean, durable strength of someone who had spent his life in hard places. His brown hair was a little long, unruly, and streaked with silver at the temples. Though he was only in his early 40s, his face was weathered, etched with lines of sun and stress that made him look harsh until you saw his eyes. They were a deep, quiet gray marked by a profound, lingering sadness. A thick, well-kept beard covered the scars on his jaw, remnants of his time in the Marine Corps. He wore his cold weather uniform, an old, cracked brown leather jacket left unzipped, revealing a plaid flannel shirt in shades of navy gray and pale beige. Beneath it, faded denim and heavy work boots completed the look. He was a man who had intentionally erased himself from the world, and he looked the part. At his feet sat Echo. Echo was a 4-year-old German shepherd, but he lacked the typical black and tan markings. Instead, his coat was a striking wolf-like mix of silver gray and white, making him blend perfectly with the granite and aspen landscape. He was Nathan's shadow in every way, a silent partner in an existence defined by loss. Echo had been with Nathan for 2 years, adopted from a rescue, and their bond was forged not in shared joy, but in a shared quiet grief. Nathan grieved his wife Kate, taken by illness 4 years prior in 2021. Echo, as far as Nathan could tell, grieved whatever life he'd had. Before Nathan sniffed the air, the smell was sharp metallic snow. Not just a dusting, but the first heavy wet storm of the season coming early, and angry generators full. Nathan murmured more to himself than the dogwood stacked Echo's ears twitched, but his eyes remained fixed on the horizon, watching the iron-gray clouds swallow the mountains. He was like his master, perpetually on watch. The ringing of the satellite phone from inside the cabin was a jarring violation of the silence. Nathan's shoulders tensed. He hated the phone. It was an emergency link, and in his world, any contact was an emergency. He walked inside his boots, thudding heavily on the wooden floor, and picked up the receiver. Scott Nathan. "Oh, thank goodness I caught you." The voice was thin, crackly with static but familiar. Grace Mitchell, his nearest neighbor who lived 12 miles down the mountain. She was a kind woman in her 60s who mostly left him alone, save for the occasional pie left on his porch. "Grace, what's wrong? It's this storm, hun. The forecast is just awful. I've got renters in the Aspen cabin, or I'm supposed to a young couple. They were supposed to check in this afternoon. But I haven't heard a peep. I'm stuck down in Lander." Nathan's jaw tightened. He knew the Aspen cabin. It was 5 miles deeper into the woods down a treacherous logging road. "What do you need?" "Grace, could you just check on it? I'm worried sick if they're not there. Just make sure the door is locked tight. If they are there, just tell them the emergency kit is under the sink. I just have a bad feeling." He looked through the window. The first fat, wet snowflakes had begun to drift past the glass. This was a bad idea. It was the exact opposite of everything he stooped. D for leaving his fortress, involving himself, interacting, but Grace was the only person who had shown him kindness since Kate passed, and she never asked for anything. "I'm heading out. Now, Grace. I'll check it. You stay safe. Bless you, Nathan. I mean it." He hung up without another word, grabbed his keys and motioned to the dog. Echo load up the shepherd's ears perked a change in routine. He bounded ahead, waiting by the door of the old pickup truck. The drive was slow. The logging road was already turning slick, the heavy snow beginning to cover the mud. Nathan's hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes scanning the tree line, a habit from a different life that he couldn't break. Echo sat rigid in the passenger seat, his head high, sniffing the air as it came through the heating vents. After 20 minutes of careful driving, they pulled up to the Aspen cabin. It was smaller than Nathan's, a frame set back in the trees. It was also dark. No lights, no car in the drive, they're not here. Nathan said relief in his voice. Good stay? He zipped his leather jacket, halfway pulled his collar tight and stepped out into the swirling snow. He was halfway to the porch when the world exploded in sound behind him. Echo was frantic. He threw himself against the passenger side window, his deep, rapid barks muffled by the glass, his paws scrambling at the door. It wasn't a warning bark. It was a 5-alarm fire. Echo, knock it off. Nathan yelled over the wind. The dog only got louder, his barks turning into desperate howls. A cold dread settled in Nathan's stomach. Echo never did this. Nathan went back and opened the truck door. Echo shot out like a bullet, a gray and white streak against the snow. He ignored the surrounding woods, ignored the perimeter, and ran straight to the cabin's front door. He reared up his front paws, hitting the wood with a solid thud, and began clawing at the paint, barking with a ferocity that made Nathan's hand automatically move to his hip, though he carried no weapon. "What is it, boy?" Nathan joined, the dog on the porch, his eyes scanning. No tracks, but the snow was coming down hard. "Grace, anyone here?" he called out. Echo whined a high, desperate sound and clawed again at the door. Okay. Nathan put his gloved hand on the doorknob. It was unlocked. His military training took over. He pushed the door open slowly. "This is Nathan Scott. Grace Mitchell asked me to check the cabin." The interior was freezing darker than it should be. The air was still heavy with the cold, and something else. A faint, expensive-sounding perfume completely out of place. "Hello," Echo pushed past him, heading for the main room. Nathan followed his senses on high alert, and then he saw her. She was huddled in the far corner, almost invisible in the gloom, sitting in a modern lightweight wheelchair. She was wrapped in one of the cabin's thin decorative blankets. Her blonde hair was matted and tangled, her face pale, her lips tinged with blue. She was shivering so violently that the entire wheelchair rattled softly on the wooden floor. Nathan stopped his mind trying to process the scene. He looked closer and saw that one of the chair's large wheels was bent at a sickening angle, the spokes broken. The woman looked up, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have frozen her. "Ma'am." Nathan said, his voice softer than he intended. Echo approached her slowly, sniffing the barks replaced by a low, questioning whine. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I'm not going to hurt you." Nathan took a slow step forward. "I'm Nathan, Grace Mitchell's neighbor. Are you hurt?" He left me." She stammered, tears freezing on her pale cheeks. My fiancé Vincent. We had a fight. He just left me. He took the car. He said I was worthless." She gestured feebly at the broken chair. "He pushed me, and it broke. He just left me here." Nathan looked at the woman, then at the useless wheelchair, and then out the window at the snow, which was no longer drifting. It was a whiteout. This cabin was not winter-proof. It had no fire, would no generator, and the pipes would freeze within hours. She wouldn't last the night. His own cabin was 2 miles away. It was a fortress. He was a man who wanted nothing to do with the world. But the world had just landed on his doorstep. He sighed a long, frustrated breath that turned into a cloud of white. The mission, as always, had changed, all right, Nathan said, moving forward with purpose. "Here's what's going to happen. We're not staying here. My place is 2 miles back. It's warm. It's safe." She flinched as he approached. "I can't." The chair. I see that he knelt in front of her. "I'm going to pick you up. We're going to my truck. Do you understand?" She stared at him, seemingly unable to process the request, her body shaking apart with cold. "I'm not asking, ma'am. We're going." He slid one arm under her legs and the other behind her back. She was lighter than he expected, almost frail. She let out a small, terrified gasp, but didn't fight him. He lifted her easily. The blanket still wrapped around her Echo heel the shepherd. His duty, as an alarm now complete, fell into position at Nathan's left heel. Nathan Scott, a man who had walked away from humanity, turned his back on the empty cabin. He carried the strange, broken woman out onto the porch and stepped into the blinding chaos of the storm. His dog at his side, the 2 miles between the cabins, was a fight. The wind tried to rip Emma from Nathan's arms, and the snow was so thick he navigated by memory rather than sight. He moved with a grim, relentless pace, his head down his body shielding hers Echo. A gray ghost stayed pressed against his leg. His presence a steady, reassuring pressure the instant Nathan kicked the heavy oak door of his cabin open. The sound of the world changed. The deafening, high-pitched scream of the wind was instantly muffled, replaced by a deep, resonant howl from the chimney. Echo scrambled inside, first his claws making a light clicking. Sound on the floor and immediately shook a cloud of snow from his thick coat. Nathan followed securin'. Gia the door shut with his boot and a heavy thud of the dead bolt. The sudden warmth and quiet of the cabin was a physical shock. "All right, I'm putting you on the couch," he said, his voice clipped. Professional, he carried her to a worn, overstuffed sofa that sat opposite a massive stone fireplace. He set her down gently but without ceremony. She landed on the cushions, feeling the agonizing pins and needles as the blood began to return to her frozen limbs. She instinctively tried to hide the sensation, pressing her lips together to keep from crying out. A paralyzed woman wouldn't feel that she watched him. He didn't fuss. He was all economy of motion. He crossed to the fireplace, added 3 large logs to the embers, and used a bellows to coax them into a roaring blaze. The heat began to roll across the room. "Stay," he commanded. It took Emma a second to realize he was speaking to Echo. The dog who had been sniffing her boots immediately retreated to a circular rug by the hearth. He lay down, paws crossed, but his head was up. His gray eyes were fixed on her, unblinking, analytical. He was not growling, not threatening. He was just watching. Nathan disappeared into a small kitchen and returned with a heavy mug, coffee, hot drink. Thank you," she whispered. Her voice trembling, her hands, when she reached for the mug, were shaking so violently she almost dropped it. He knelt, his movements sure and impersonal. He took her hands in his own. His were rough, calloused, and radiated an almost painful warmth. He held her hands around the mug, forcing her to grip it. "Hold it, feel the heat, drink it." He repeated. She obeyed, sipping the scalding, bitter coffee. It burned a trail down her throat and ignited a small fire in her chest. My chair," she said, trying to make her lie sound solid. He broke it. "I don't know, it's in the truck." Nathan cut her off, standing up. "It's useless in this. The snow is already 3 feet deep at the door. You're not going anywhere." His tone wasn't cruel, just blunt. It was the voice of a man stating an undeniable fact. He was suspicious, she could feel it. A thick, palpable aura of distrust rolled off him. He was a man who had walled himself off from the world, and she had just been carried over the ramparts. He went to a closet and pulled out 2 thick, heavy wool blankets. They were clean but old, the color of oatmeal, the edges bound in faded satin. He tossed one onto her lap. "The cold is in your bones," he said. "Get out of the wet clothes. Put this around you." He turned his back, giving her a semblance of privacy. Emma's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her designer coat. The coat alone was worth more than this entire cabin. The lie felt heavy and clumsy on her tongue. I can't, my legs. I can't do it alone." Nathan paused. He let out a long, slow breath through his nose. He turned back, his gray eyes hard. "Right the blanket, wrap it over, everything we need to get your core temperature up." He didn't offer to help her. He just watched his expression unreadable as she struggled to drape the heavy wool over her damp clothes. He was a man accustomed to hardship, and her performance of helplessness seemed to bore him while she worked. He moved through the cabin, checking windows, securing shutters. The wind hammered at the small building, a physical assault. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging the room into the warm, dancing glow of the fireplace. Nathan didn't hesitate. He lit 2 oil lamps, their flames casting a gentle amber light. "Generator will kick in," he said, "but I prefer the quiet." The quiet. The only sounds were the roar of the wind outside, the crackle of the fire, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the dog. Echo had not moved. He was still watching her. His vigilance was unnerving. It was a pure animal judgment that she couldn't charm, couldn't bribe, and couldn't lie to. This was when the true weight of her deception began to settle on her. Emma Collins, a woman whose net worth was a matter of public speculation, sat huddled in a stranger's cabin, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Her lie, which she had crafted as a desperate tool to test Vincent, felt obscene. Here she looked around. There was no art on the walls. Only functional shelves made of reclaimed barnwood. They were filled with worn-out paperbacks, their spines broken. She saw books on diesel engine repair, Wyoming history, and classical philosophy. There was no marble, no chrome, no glass. The floor was wood-scarred and uneven. The furniture was old, but immaculately kept. This was not a house designed to impress. It was a house built to survive. Her eyes landed on the mantelpiece, a single slab of rough-hewn pine. There was only one object on it, a framed photograph. It showed Nathan Younger smiling his arm around a woman with bright, laughing eyes. Kate, this cabin was not just a shelter. It was a shrine to a life that had been lost. It was a place of profound, simple honesty. Nathan, this suspicious, hardened man, had brought her into his home without question. He had taken her from the cold, given her warmth, given her coffee, and demanded nothing in return. His kindness was not a transaction. It was a reflex as basic and as powerful as the storm outside. She, in turn, had brought a lie into this sanctuary. She who could buy 100 of these cabins and not notice the expense was pretending to have nothing. She was using her paralysis as a shield, a story to gain sympathy here in the face of true Spartan reality. Her lie felt like a cheap, gaudy jewel. It was heavy and it was cold, and she was ashamed. "Thank you," she whispered again. But this time the words were not for the coffee. Nathan, who was standing by the window looking out at the white void, didn't turn. "For what?" "For helping me." "Don't thank me," he said, his voice flat. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for Grace. And I did it for the dog. He doesn't like to see things freeze." He turned and his gray eyes met hers. "We're trapped here. The plows won't run this road for at least 3 days, maybe a week." He walked over, picked up the second wool blanket and dropped it on Echo. The dog buried his nose on it finally, letting his head rest on his paws, though his eyes remained open, fixed on her. "Get some sleep." Nathan said the fire needs to be fed every 2 hours. "I'll take the first watch." He picked up a rifle from beside the door, checked the action with a smooth, practiced motion, and set it back down. Then he sat in an old wooden rocking chair far from the fire and opened a book. Emma Collins, the billionaire, huddled on the couch, trapped not just by the storm, but by the quiet decency of the Q bin and the unsettling stare of his dog. The lie had never felt heavier. The first full day of the storm was a lesson in silence. The world outside the cabin had ceased to exist, replaced by a screaming white void. The wind-driven snow didn't fall. It attacked the small building from all sides, scouring the windows and piling in drifts that were already swallowing the porch inside. The silence was of a different kind. It was thick, heavy, and human. Nathan Scott moved through it like a phantom. He was a man of Spartan routine. He rose before dawn, his movements quiet, efficient. He fed the fire. His back to her, he shoveled a small path to the woodshed, returning with an armload of wood, his jacket covered in snow. He made coffee. The scrape of the spoon against the ceramic mug, unnaturally loud in the stillness, he had given Emma a bowl of hot oatmeal. He'd set it on the small table near the couch, along with a bottle of water. He said nothing. Emma ate her guilt, a bitter flavor in her mouth. She was an intruder, a burden, and worst of all, a liar. "How long do you think this will last?" she had asked, her voice sounding thin, desperate to break the quiet. Nathan, who was checking the seals on the back window, paused. He looked over his shoulder, his gray eyes unreadable daze. He turned back to his work and the conversation was over. Her world was now confined to the 20-foot space between the fireplace and the kitchen. Her only companions were a man who wouldn't speak and a dog who wouldn't stop staring. Echo was always tea. Here he was never aggressive. He just watched. When Nathan was outside, the dog would lie by the door. A silent gray guardian, his eyes fixed on her when Nathan was inside. Echo lay on his rug by the hearth, his head up, his ears constantly swiveling, tracking her every small movement. She knew dogs. Her world was full of them, pampered, perfectly groomed creatures paraded at galas, tiny companions tucked into designer bags. This was not those dogs. This was an animal that felt more like a sentient, four-legged judgment. She tried to bridge the gap. "Hey, Echo," she whispered on the first afternoon when Nathan was in the back room, the rhythmic sound of a knife on a wet stone grating on her nerves. The dog's head tilted, his ears large and alert, pivoted toward her. It's quite a storm," she said, feeling foolish. "I'm glad you and your dad found me." Echo simply stared. He did not wag his tail. He did not stand up. He offered her nothing. Later, when Nathan prepared their meager dinner, canned stew heated on the wood stove, she tried a different approach. Nathan put a bowl down for her, then filled Echo's. The dog, she noted, sat patiently, not moving toward the food, until Nathan gave a low, quiet command. Emma, holding her own bowl, broke off a small piece of the dried bread Nathan had given her. She held it out. "Here, boy." Echo looked from her hand to Nathan. "He's not a stray." "Nathan," said his voice sharp from the shadows. "By the stove he eats from his bowl." Emma's face flushed hot with embarrassment. She retracted her hand, placing the bread back in her stew. "I'm sorry, I just eat," he said, not unkindly, but as a simple final order. The silence that followed was even heavier. The second night was worse. The storm seemed to gain a new, furious energy, as if trying to tear the roof from the cabin. The walls groaned. Emma, lying on the couch, couldn't sleep. Her body ached not from her fabricated paralysis, but from the bone-deep cold and the tension of her lie. She was terrified of moving in her sleep, of stretching her leg, of giving herself away. Nathan, for his part, had not slept on the couch, as she'd expected. He had pulled a cot from a closet and set it up near the door, his rifle leaning against the wall beside it. He was guarding the exit, or she realized with a chill, guarding her from the exit. It was on the third evening that the facade finally cracked. The storm had not abated. The cabin was dim, lit only by the golden pulse of the oil lamps and the flickering hungry fire. The generator had been off for hours. Nathan had said they needed to conserve fuel. He was sitting at the kitchen table, meticulously cleaning his rifle, the parts laid out on an old, soft cloth. The methodical metallic scrape and click of him working on the weapon was the only sound besides the wind. Emma was on the couch, wrapped in the oatmeal-colored wool blankets she had given up trying to read one of his worn paperbacks. She was staring out the window, but there was nothing to see. The glass was a black mirror reflecting the room back at her, a distorted, cozy prison. She saw her own reflection, a pale, tired woman, her blonde hair stringy, her face scrubbed clean of the polish and perfection she usually wore like armor, and she saw the lie she thought of Vincent. He would have called this place a hovel. He would have been pacing, furious on his phone, threatening lawsuits, demanding a helicopter rescue. His anger would have filled the small space suffocating Nathan. In contrast, simply existed. He belonged here. He chopped the wood. He fed the fire. He maintained his tools. He asked her for nothing. He offered her shelter and expected nothing. Her lie felt so clever when she deployed it against Vincent. It was a tool to expose his shallow transactional love. But here in this cabin, her lie was not a tool. It was a violation. This man, this broken, silent Cuban, lived by a code she couldn't even begin to understand. His world was built on hard, simple truths. The fire is hot. The storm is dangerous. The dog is loyal. She was the only thing in this sea, Aben, that was fake. The realization hit her not as a thought, but as a physical weight settling in her chest and making it hard to breathe. Her throat tightened, a single hot tear escaped and slid down her cold cheek. She brushed it away, angry, embarrassed, but it was followed by another and another. She turned her face away from the room toward the dark, cold glass, pressing her fist to her mouth. She made no sound. It was a desperate, silent collapse, the full weight of her loneliness, her guilt, and her profound self-disgust crashing down on her. She was crying not for her lost fortune, but for the fact that she had become someone she didn't even know, a person who had to lie to find a single moment of real kindness. A soft click of claws on the floorboards cut through the howl of the wind across the room. Nathan's hand stilled on his rifle. He had heard it too. Emma held her breath, trying to stifle the small sob that threatened to escape. She slowly turned her head. Echo was standing no longer by the hearth. He had left his post. He was looking at her, his head tilted, his gray fur bristling slightly in the firelight. He took a step, then another. He moved slowly, not with the suspicion of the past 2 days, but with a quiet, deliberate curiosity. He stopped a few feet from the couch, sniffing the air, his dark, intelligent eyes searching her face. He did not see a paralyzed woman. He did not see a billionaire. He saw only the raw, unadulterated scent of her distress. Emma's breath hitched echo. She whispered, her voice breaking. The dog took the final 2 steps. He stood beside the couch level with her face. He whined a low, soft sound deep in his chest. Then he nudged his cold, damp nose under her trembling hand, which was clutching the blanket. Emma flinched, a small gasp escaping her. Echo nudged her hand again, more insistently this time, and then with a long, slow sigh that seemed to release all the tension in the room, he rested his heavy, broad head directly on her knees, right on her lap, his eyes no long. Or watching her closed, it was a gesture of complete, unconditional surrender, a gesture of comfort. For a long moment, Emma was frozen. Then slowly, tentatively, she lifted her hand and rested it on his head. Her fingers sank into the thick, warm fur of his ruff. He leaned into the touch, a barely perceptible movement, and sighed again, across the room. Nathan Scott sat perfectly still. He did not move. He did not breathe. He was staring, his knuckles white on the steel of his rifle. He was watching his dog, his Echo, the dog who hadn't offered his trust to a single soul since Kate died, the dog who was his partner, his shadow, his last line of defense against the world. And that dog had just laid his head in the lap of a stranger, offering a comfort Nathan himself had forgotten how to give. Nathan looked from the dog to the woman, and for the first time the hard, suspicious set of his jaw softened. The first crack had appeared in the ice the next morning. The climate inside the cabin had shifted as profoundly as the landscape outside the storm's violent, screaming rage had settled into a heavy, suffocating silence. The snow was no longer falling. It was simply there. A white wall past every window. The tension between Nathan and Emma, however, had broken when Emma awoke on the couch, stiff and cold. The first thing she saw was Echo. He was not on his rug by the hearth. He was asleep on the floor next to her, his gray head resting near her feet. When Nathan emerged from his room, he stopped, his gaze fixed on the dog. He looked at Emma, and for the first time, the suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something else, a deep, profound confusion Echo had chosen. The silent, watchful judgment of the past 2 days was gone. When Emma stirred, the dog's tail thumped twice on the wooden floor. He lifted his head, nudged her hand, and gave a low, quiet whine. Nathan just watched. He made coffee, his movements just as precise as the day before, but the rigid set of his shoulders had eased. He brought her a mug, his hand pausing. As Echo pushed his head under Emma's other hand, demanding attention, he seems to have made a decision. Emma whispered, her voice rough with sleep. "He's a dog," Nathan said curtly. But the words lacked their previous bite. He handed her the coffee. He doesn't know any better. But he did. Nathan knew that dog Echo was the last living piece of his old life, the last connection to Kate. The dog had been a shell since she passed, just as Nathan was. For Echo to open up to this stranger, it was a betrayal or a miracle, and Nathan didn't know which the day wore on. In this new awkward truce, the snow had stopped, but they were buried. The drifts were easily 6 feet deep against the windows, casting the cabin in a dim gray light. Nathan spent the morning outside, his movements punctuated by the rhythmic scrape of a shovel. He was clearing the porch, the path to the woodshed, and a small area for Echo. Emma was left alone in the main room, and she was trapped. Nathan had at some point retrieved her broken wheelchair from his truck. It sat in the corner, a useless, mangled piece of modern technology. She was confined to the couch or to dragging herself to the small adjacent bathroom, a humiliating, exhausting process she performed only when Nathan was occupied elsewhere. The cabin, which had felt like a cozy sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The living room was on a slightly lower level than the kitchen and the main door, 3 shallow, wide steps that was the barrier. 3 steps that in her charade were as unscalable as the mountains outside. She wanted to see the sky. She wanted to smell the air. She felt the cabin fever, the claustrophobia pressing down on her. Nathan returned, snow-caked on his beard, and clinging to his eyelashes. He stamped the snow off his boots and shed his heavy leather jacket. He didn't look at her, but he saw her. He saw her staring at the 3 steps, her gaze fixed on the front door as if it were an exit to another universe. He saw the helplessness, and for the first time he didn't see it as a burden. He saw it as a problem to be solved. He walked past her into the kitchen, poured a mug of coffee, and stood there for a long minute, just staring at the 3 steps. Emma watched him. He looked at the steps, then at the wheelchair, then at the steps again. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Then, without a single word, he set his mug down, walked to a large storage closet and pulled out a measuring tape. He went to the steps. He measured their height. He measured their width. He wrote the numbers down on a scrap of wood with a carpenter's pencil. He went to the front door, opened it, and disappeared into the blizzard-white world. Emma listened. She heard the sound of the door to his workshop, a separate smaller building attached to the woodshed, creaking open. Then silence. It was broken minutes later by the sharp, rhythmic rasp of a handsaw cutting through lumber. Emma's heart seemed to stop. She knew exactly what that sound was. She had overseen the construction of 3 homes, 2 of them from scratch. She knew the sound of work. The sawing continued for an hour, a steady, determined meditation against the backdrop of the wind. It was joined by the sound of a drill and then the careful, muffled thud of a hammer, as if he was purposely striking the blows softly. She sat on the couch. Her hands clasped the lie, a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. He was a man of action. He hadn't asked her what she needed. He had seen it. The simplicity of it, the quiet, practical kindness was more profound than any grand, expensive gesture she had ever received. Vincent would have called a concierge. Nathan was building. 2 hours later he returned. His face was flushed with the cold, his beard dusted with sawdust. He was carrying a long, simple, ugly ramp made of raw plywood and 2 kick-4s. It was heavy, but he handled it easily. He didn't speak. He maneuvered it through the door and into the living room. It fit perfectly, locking into place over the 3 steps, creating a solid, gentle incline from her level to the front door. He stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. It'll hold, he said, his voice a low rumble. It's not pretty. Nathan. She started, her voice thick. The porch is cleared. He interrupted. He walked over to her broken wheelchair. He inspected the bent wheel, then, with a grunt of effort, used his bare hands to bend the metal frame back into a shape that was at least somewhat round. The wheel wobbled, but it would roll. He pushed the chair in front of her. Let's go, Sapke. It took a minute. A clumsy transfer from the couch to the chair, but he helped his hands strong and sure on her arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He pushed the chair up the new ramp. The wood groaned slightly, but held just as he'd said. He navigated her through the doorway and onto the covered porch. The air hit her first. It was so cold it felt like a physical slap, but it was clean, sharp, and alive. It smelled of pine ozone and frozen earth. The world was a blinding, sculpted white, the snow piled in drifts that looked like frozen waves. The sky was a pale, bruised gray. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Nathan stood beside her, not touching her, not speaking, just sharing the space. Echo had followed them, sitting at Nathan's side, his warm breath pluming in the air. You didn't have to do that, Emma said finally, her voice quiet. I had to do something, he replied, looking out at the woods. Can't just sit. Not good to just sit. No one has ever done something like that for me. He finally looked at her. His gray eyes were clear. The confusion gone done. What build a ramp? It's just wood. It's practical. It was kind, she whispered. He frowned, uncomfortable with the word. He leaned against the railing and crossed his arms. The storm is breaking. We'll be dug out in a few days. They stood in the cold, clean silence for a long time. The only sound was the wind, now a gentle whisper, and the soft drip of snow melting from the eaves. Why do you live out here? She asked, breaking the silence all alone. Nathan didn't answer for a full minute. He watched a blue jay land on a snow-covered branch. I'm not alone, he said, nodding toward Echo. You know what I mean? He sighed. The sound was heavy, full of a weariness that went beyond the storm. I live here because it's the only place that makes sense. The world out there. He gestured vaguely. It's too loud, too fast, people don't listen. He paused, then continued, his voice softer. My wife, Kate, she loved this mountain. She was a geologist. She understood things, quiet things, rocks time. He touched the rough-hewn log that supported the porch roof. We built this place together after my last tour. It was supposed to be our fortress, our quiet place. He fell silent. Emma waited. She passed 4 years ago, 2021. The quiet? It's different now, but it's all I have left of her. He looked at Emma, his eyes raw. I'm not hiding out here, Miss Collins. I'm just trying to hold on to the quiet. This, he tapped the log again, is all that's left. Emma looked at the strong, simple ramp he had built. It wasn't just wood. It was an answer. He was a man who fixed what was broken. Kate, Emma said, testing the name. She must have been very special. She was Nathan. Said, turning his face back to the mountains, she was practical. She would have built the ramp in half the time. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. It was the first time Emma had seen it. It transformed his harsh, weathered face, revealing the man who had existed before the grief, before the quiet. And in that moment, Emma's lie, her heavy, stupid, pointless lie, felt like a betrayal of something sacred. The conversation on the porch had changed things. The fortress of Nathan's silence had been breached not by Emma, but by his own admission of grief. He had spoken of Kate. He had shared his vulnerability, and now the cabin felt charged with a new fragile intimacy. That night, the storm, which had briefly paused, returned for a final violent encore. The wind howled, rattling the shutters Nathan had secured in the main room. The sleeping arrangements remained the same, but the occupants had shifted. Nathan was on his cot by the door. His back to the room, Emma was on the couch. But Echo was not on his rug by the hearth. He had, of his own volition, chosen a new spot. The floor beside the couch, a gray protective shadow near the woman who had for 3 days shown him nothing but quiet kindness for Nathan Scott. Sleep was not a refuge. It was a shallow, vigilant state, a habit burned into his psyche by years of service. He did not rest. He waited. It was long after midnight in the deep, breathless quiet between gusts of wind that a sound pulled him from the surface. It was not the storm. It was not the house settling. It was a soft scraping sound, a footstep, a drag. No, a soft, clean click, the sound of a glass being placed on the kitchen counter. Nathan was awake instantly. His body was rigid, his senses screaming. The cot creaked as he shifted his weight, his hand moving in the dark, bypassing the rifle and finding the heavy metal flashlight on the floor. He thought an animal, a raccoon, a marten, something that had found a way in. He rose without a sound, his bare feet making no purchase on the cold wooden floor. He moved past the couch in the faint dying glow of the fireplace embers. He saw the mound of blankets, but they were in a heap. She was not on the couch. His heart hammered against his ribs. He thumbed the switch on the flashlight. A bright white beam cut through the darkness flooding the kitchen. It was empty. The glass of water sat on the counter exactly as he'd heard. He swung the beam toward the main window, the one that looked out over the deep snow-filled ravine, and the light found her. She was standing, not leaning, not struggling. She was standing perfectly, almost casually. Her back to him, both feet were planted firmly on the floor. She was wearing a simple cotton shirt and pants he'd given her, clothes that had belonged to Kate. One hand was braced lightly on the window frame. The other was stretching her arm, reaching above her head as she worked a knot out of her S. Hold her a picture of domestic, normal comfort. The beam of the flashlight froze on her Nathan's world, tilted the air, left his lungs stolen by a sudden icy vacuum. The ramp. The word echoed in his mind. The ramp. His hands calloused and rough aching from the cold as he sawed the plywood, his knees protesting as he knelt to secure the 2 fours. The image of him bending her broken wheelchair wheel back into place. He had talked about Kate. He had stood on the porch, his chest torn open, and he had talked about his wife to this liar. He felt a hot, acidic shame crawl up his throat, so powerful it made him dizzy. He had been played for a fool, his grief, his home, his memories. All of it had been used as a stage for her performance. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He was a statue, his arm locked, holding the beam of light, steady. The Cuban, the man trained for any threat, was completely disarmed by the sheer audacious depth of the betrayal in the circle of light. Emma didn't seem to realize she'd been caught. She was lost in the moment, mesmerized by the storm. She had been a prisoner for days, a prisoner of the cabin, a prisoner of her wheelchair, and worst of all, a prisoner of her own lie. The claustrophobia had become unbearable after she was sure Nathan was asleep. She had stood just to feel the blood in her legs, just to feel real. The sudden bright light on her back was a physical blow. She froze. She turned slowly, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide and terrified. A perfect mirror of the woman he'd found in the Aspen cabin. But this time the terror was real. Nathan, she breathed. He did not answer. The silence in the cabin was absolute. A heavy, crushing weight. It was just the sound of the wind, the tremor of the flashlight in his hand, and the two of them locked in the spotlight of the lie, and then a new sound entered the scene. A soft woof echo asleep at the foot of the couch lifted his head. He blinked, confused by the light and the tension. He stood up, stretched his long gray body and let out a small, sleepy yawn. He looked at Nathan, a dark statue by the door, then he looked at Emma. His dog brain processed the scene. There was Emma. She was standing in his mind. This was not a betrayal. This was not a lie. This was a wonderful new development. The sad, quiet woman who sat all the time, the woman who gave the best scratches, was now up. She was standing just like Nathan. This was a game. This was a play signal. A low, excited rumble started in his chest. His tail, long and bushy, began to move, a single hesitant wag. Emma, her eyes still locked on Nathan's face, pleaded. Nathan, please, let me explain. Nathan's face was a mask of cold fury. His silence was her only answer. Echo, hearing the sudden energy in Emma's voice, took it as confirmation. His tail went from a wag to a blur, a heavy thump, thump, thump against the side of the sofa. He trotted forward, his claws clicking on the floor, and pushed his head against Emma's leg. He looked up at her, his mouth open in a happy pant, and then back at Nathan. She's up. Look, she's standing. And then he let out a single bright, playful bark. The sound was obscene. It was the sound of pure, simple joy, and it detonated in the deadly silence of Nathan's betrayal. His dog, his loyal partner, the animal that had been his only truth for 4 years. His Echo was wagging his tail at the lie. Echo. No, Emma. Whispered, her hands shaking as she tried to push his head away. The dog, confused, thought she was playing. He dodged her hand and barked again, a short, sharp invitation, play with me. Nathan Scott stood in the darkness. He watched his dog celebrate the woman who had just ripped his fragile trust to shreds. He watched Emma, her face pale, her lie exposed. He did not speak. He did not yell with a slow, deliberate movement. He lowered the flashlight. The beam dropped from her face to the floor. Then, with a final sharp click, he turned the light off. The cabin was plunged back into total darkness, save for the faint red glow of the dying embers. The only sound was the wind and tea. He confused happy panting of the dog who had just illuminated the truth. Dawn arrived not as a sunrise, but as a change in the quality of the darkness. The world outside the cabin window slowly shifted from a howling kinetic black to a still bruised gray. The storm, having exhausted its fury, was over, and in the silence the betrayal was deafening. Nathan had been up since before the light, his movements rigid, precise. He did not look at Emma. He did not speak. The man who had just the day before shared a vulnerable piece of his past was gone. In his place was the Q bin. A cold, efficient machine. He fed the fire. He made coffee. 1 mug he fed. Echo Emma sat on the edge of the couch, her feet planted firmly on the floor. The lie was over. There was no point in pretending she was dressed in the clothes he had given her, Kate's clothes, and the shame of it felt like a physical weight. Echo was a knot of confused energy. He whined a low, anxious sound and moved between them. He would nudge Nathan's hand, be ignored, and then trot over to Emma, resting his head on her knee, looking for the comfort he'd found the night before. But the air was too thick with human misery. Nathan. Emma began, her voice a dry croak. Please don't. The word was flat. Devoid of anger, devoid of anything but a complete, chilling emptiness. It was the sound of a door being locked. He pulled on his heavy boots, grabbed a shovel, and went outside. Emma watched through the window as he began to dig, not just a path, but with a contained, furious energy. She saw him reach the porch, his back stiff. He found the ramp he had built for her. He kicked it, the sound of dull thud dislodging it from the steps. He picked it up, carried it 10 yards from the cabin, and threw it into a snowdrift. A useless, ugly piece of wood, a monument to his mistake. Emma closed her eyes, a fresh wave of self-loathing washing over her. That was when the new sound began. It was not the wind. It was not a sound of the woods. It was a deep, rhythmic, artificial thunder that seemed to come from the sky itself, a heavy, percussive thump, thump, thump that rattled the dishes in the kitchen cabinet. Nathan froze, shovel in hand. He looked up, his body instantly shifting into a defensive stance, scanning the gray sky. Echo beside him erupted. He was not barking at a threat on the ground. He was barking at the sky, a series of deep, challenging roars. Emma ran to the window, her heart seizing, though not with fear. With dread, she knew that sound, a sleek black machine. A Bell 429 helicopter broke through the low-hanging clouds. It circled the cabin, once a predator, assessing its territory. Its searchlight cutting a sterile white cone across the snow. Then, with terrifying precision, it descended its rotor wash, blasting the new snow into a blinding vortex. It settled onto the wide, flat clearing Nathan used as a yard, its blades slowly winding down. Nathan had not moved. He stood, his jaw set, a shovel in his hand, a gray shepherd at his side facing the high-tech intrusion. A side door on the helicopter slid open. A man in a dark functional flight suit hopped out. This was Cole Ramirez, the pilot. His features hidden behind mirrored aviator sunglasses, he stood at attention by the machine. Then the passenger emerged. He stepped out of the helicopter and onto the snow, as if stepping from a limousine onto a red carpet. This was Vincent Hale. He was the perfect antithesis of Nathan. Where Nathan was weathered, Vincent was polished. He wore a dark navy cashmere overcoat that was clearly worth a small car. The collar turned up, his black leather shoes, completely impractical for the terrain, looked spotless. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, untouched by the storm or the wind. He radiated an aura of effortless, expensive control. He looked at the cabin, his upper lip curling just slightly, a flicker of distaste. He looked at Nathan, his eyes sliding over him, as if he were a piece of uninteresting rustic furniture. Then he saw Emma, who had without thinking stepped onto the porch she was standing, next to Nathan, her feet bare on the frozen wood. "Well," Vincent said, his voice carrying easily in the cold, still air. It was smooth, cultured, and dripping with condescension. "The sleeping princess awakens, and look, a miracle. She stands, Vincent." Emma breathed, her voice shaking. How did you find me?" Vincent gave a short, indulgent laugh, as one would at a child's foolish question. "Emma, darling, please, did you really think the emergency satellite phone I gave you was just for emergencies?" He tapped the side of his head. "The GPS chip was the first thing my security team installed. I'm disappointed, really. I thought the game would last longer." He finally properly looked at Nathan. He scanned him from his worn-out boots to his flannel shirt, to the beard still dusted with snow, so Vincent said. Addressing Emma, but looking at Nathan, "This is the local color you've adopted. The noble savage. I suppose I should thank him for keeping you warm. Did you tell him his name, or were you Jane for the full frontier experience?" Nathan said nothing. His hand was tight on the shovel. He was a statue carved from ice and rage. "The farce is over, Emma." Vincent said, his voice hardening, the playful mockery gone. He was bored now. "This was business, Cole? Is here we're leaving. We have the Anderson Gala on Friday, and you have made me look like a fool. Get your things." He took a step toward the porch, his confidence absolute. He was a man who had never been told no. He reached for Emma's arm, his expression one of annoyance, as if grabbing a recalcitrant pet. "Now, Emma, enough." He never touched her. A low, guttural sound rumbled from the snow, a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate in the air. Echo, who had been standing silently at Nathan's side, had moved. He was now at the bottom of the porch steps, perfectly positioned between Vincent and Emma. His ruff stood on end, making him look twice as large. His gray fur bristled. His lips curled back just slightly, revealing a white flash of teeth. The sound that came from him was no longer a confused whine. It was a deep, resonant, and utterly serious warning growl. Vincent Hale, a man who controlled boardrooms and markets, flinched. He physically recoiled, taking a full step back, his polished facade cracked, revealing the coward beneath Nathan. Emma said, her voice sharp with panic. But Vincent, assuming the dog belonged to the mountain man, snarled, "Call off your animal." Nathan didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. Vincent turned back to Emma, his face ugly with anger. "Emma, I am not playing get on the helicopter, or I swear." Echo took one more step and the growl became a hard, sharp snap of the air, and in that moment something inside Emma shifted. She looked at Vincent, A man who saw her as an accessory, a man who had just admitted to tracking her like property. She looked at Nathan, a man she had deeply betrayed who was now standing silent and steady on her side of the standoff, and she looked at Echo, the animal she had lied to, the animal who in her moment of deepest shame had laid his head on her lap. The animal who was now without hesitation willing to protect her. She had been searching for something real, and here it was, in the form of a silent Q-bin and a loyal dog. "No," Emma said. Vincent stopped. "What did you say?" She stood up taller, planting her bare feet on the icy wood. She looked him directly in the eye, her voice clear, sharp, and ringing in the cold mountain air. The rhythmic thunder of the helicopter's blades beat against the mountains, a sound of profound mechanical intrusion. It grew fainter, then fainter, until it was finally swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of the Wyoming wilderness. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute. It was colder than the snow, heavier than the storm on the porch. No one moved. Emma stood her bare feet, aching, the frozen wood of the porch biting into her skin. She didn't notice her entire being was focused on the man beside her. Nathan Scott had not moved a muscle. He was still standing in the same spot, his hand grippy on the handle of the snow shovel. He was not looking at the sky where the helicopter had vanished. He was looking at the ground, at the pristine, untroubled snow. Echo. The dog was a knot of vibrating confusion. The adrenaline from the confrontation had not faded. He stood between them, his ruff still half raised, and he let out a low, anxious whine. He looked up at Nathan, expecting a command, a word of praise, something. Nathan said nothing. He did not look at Emma with a slow, deliberate motion. Nathan turned. He walked past her, his boots thudding heavily on the porch steps he had cleared. He did not go inside. He went back to the yard. He lifted the shovel and with a grunt of physical exertion plunged it into the deep, packed snow near the cabin's foundation. He was digging. Not to clear a path, he was just digging. The rhythmic scrape and hiss of the shovel was the only soundscape, hiss throw. He was a man building a wall of silence. Emma's breath hitched. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. She stumbled back inside the cabin, collapsing onto the wooden bench by the door, her hands shaking so violently she clasped them together. The cabin felt different. The cozy, warm sanctuary had become a cold, sterile box. Echo followed her in his claws, clicking anxiously on the floor. He nudged her hand, looking for reassurance when she didn't respond. He padded to the center of the room and lay down his head on his paws, his dark eyes tracking the door, waiting for his master to make sense of the world again. After 10 long minutes, Nathan returned. He did not slam the door. He closed it with a soft final click. He did not look at her. He walked past her, past the couch, past the fireplace. He was treating her as if she did not exist. He went to the kitchen and ran the tap, the sound of the water drumming into the iron sink unnaturally loud. He washed his hands, scrubbing them with a ferocity that was frightening. "Nathan," she whispered. He turned off the tap. The sound vanished. "I am so sorry," she choked out, standing up. I never meant." He turned around slowly. His face was a mask, the warmth she had seen on the porch yesterday. The man who had spoken of Kate was gone. The Q-bin was back. His gray eyes were flat cold and looked straight through her. "Sorry." For what he asked, his voice a low, empty rasp, for lying or for getting caught. "No, it wasn't like that. I was trying to escape him. The money, the world I was in, it's a cage. I needed to know if I don't care about your money." He said it so quietly. It was more brutal than any shout. He walked past her into the center of the room. He looked around, his gaze falling on the ramp he had thrown into the snow. His jaw tightened. "I don't care that you're rich," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I care that you lied." He faced her. "I let you into my home. This house, this is all I have left of her. This house is built on. It was built on truth. It was the only place left." He was not angry. That was the terrifying part. He was not yelling. He was dissecting. He was a surgeon, cutting away the infection. And she was the infection. I built a ramp for you, he said, his voice flat, stating a fact. My hands, they ached from the cold. I wasted lumber on it. Nathan, please. I talked to you, he continued as if she hadn't spoken on that porch. I said her name. I talked about Kate. He winced, a flicker of profound pain crossing his face. I haven't said her name to another person since the funeral. Not in 4 years. Emma was crying now, silent tears of shame. It wasn't a joke, wasn't it? I was desperate, and what about him? Nathan's voice finally cracked. Not with sadness, but with a sudden hot fury, he pointed at the dog. Echo, hearing the tension, had risen to his feet. He trusted you, Nathan snapped. He laid his head in your lap. He chose you, his trust. His trust is the only clean, honest thing I've had in my life since she died. He stepped closer, his gaze pinning her. His trust is real, and you took that. You took it and you used it. He looked at the dog and his voice broke, but he recovered. It instantly turning the break into a blade. He barked. He thought you were a game. He wagged his tail at your lie. You turned my dog, my Echo, into a joke. This was it. The core of the betrayal. It wasn't the house or the wood, or even the memory of Kate. It was the dog. It was the corruption of the one pure thing he had left. I lost Kate, he said, his voice dropping back into that Arctic void. This place, this quiet. It was all I had to hold on to. Trust was the only thing I had left to give, and you turned it all into a game. See if the mountain man and his mud are stupid enough to fall for it. He shook his head, a small, disgusted motion. Well, congratulations. He turned his back on her. The confrontation was over. The verdict was in. He picked up a log and moved toward the fireplace. What do you want me to do? She whispered, her body trembling. Do you want me to leave? I can call Vincent back. Nathan's back. Was to her. He knelt by the fire, opening the iron grate. The rush of air made the embers glow. I don't want anything from you, he said, his voice muffled, distant. The helicopter is gone. The roads are still blocked. You're still trapped here. Just stay on your side of the room and don't talk to the dog. He placed the log in the fire. It was not forgiveness. It was not a reprieve. It was a sentence. He was not kicking her out. That would have been too easy, too clean. He was instead erasing her. He stood up, dusted his hands off, and walked to his cot. He picked up the book he had been reading days before. He sat down and opened it. The coldness was absolute. His refusal to engage, his dismissal of her as a human being, worthy of even anger, was a far more brutal punishment than anything Vincent could have imagined. Emma sank onto the couch. She was no longer a person. She was a ghost, trapped in a house with a man who could no longer see her. She looked at Echo. The dog wind caught in the no-man's land between the two hostile forces. He looked at Nathan, but his master's face was hidden by a book. He looked at Emma, but she was broken. He padded back to his rug by the hearth, lay down, and placed his head on his paws. The bridge of trust was gone. Emma Collins sat in the heavy, suffocating silence. She finally understood. She had broken the one thing in this entire harsh, beautiful landscape that money could not buy and that apologies could not fix. She had broken trust. The night was long and cold. Emma didn't sleep. She sat on the couch, wrapped in the wool blankets, listening to the cabin settle and creak around her. Every rustle of the fire, every groan of the ancient wood seemed to amplify the crushing weight of Nathan's silence. He hadn't moved from his cot by the door. She knew he wasn't sleeping. She could feel his quiet vigilance, a palpable wall of unforgiveness. Echo, too, seemed to sense the shift. He lay on his rug by the hearth, his head on his paws, but his eyes were open. Tracking her in the dim light, he would whine occasionally, a soft questioning sound, looking from Emma to Nathan, as if begging them to make sense of the new terrible chasm that had opened between them. But neither spoke as dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world outside in hues of bruised violet and cold pink. Emma knew what she had to do. Staying was pointless. It was a prolonged agony for everyone. especially for Nathan, who now saw her as nothing more than a living embodiment of betrayal. She had her phone, the satellite phone Vincent had given her, the one with the GPS chip that had brought him here. She had kept it hidden, a last link to her old life, a desperate tether she hadn't been ready to cut. Now, it was her only way out. She waited. She heard the distinct sounds of Nathan preparing to go outside, the scrape of his shovel from the porch. Yesterday was gone. Today she heard the more purposeful thud of his heavy boots, the creak of the door to his woodshed. He was leaving. He was going into the forest as he usually did when he needed to distance himself from the world today. She was the world he was distancing himself from. She heard the crunch of his boots on the packed snow growing fainter, the gentle thud of the woodshed door closing. He was gone. The cabin was silent again. Just her and Echo. The dog watched her, his ears slightly lowered. Emma slowly, carefully slid her hand under the cushion of the couch, retrieving the sleek, dark satellite phone. The cold, smooth plastic felt alien in her hand compared to the rough wool blankets and the worn wood of the cabin she powered it on. The screen glowed a sterile blue light in the dim room. She had reception. Her fingers trembled as she navigated to her contacts. She knew the number by heart. It was the private direct line to Simon Clark, her personal driver and head of security for all her family's ground operations. Simon was a man of quiet competence who asked no questions and executed every instruction with military precision. He was in his late 50s, always impeccably dressed, a former Special Forces operative who now navigated the intricate world of private jet logistics and secured transportation with the same unwavering efficiency. She typed the message, short, direct, no emotions. Simon location GPS coordinates auto-filled by phone require immediate extraction, private chopper or ground vehicle, whichever is fastest. Ensure discretion, do not involve Vincent Hale. She pressed send. The small sent confirmation flashed on the screen. It would take hours. Perhaps the better part of the day for Simon to arrange it. The nearest private airstrip was in Lander, and a ground vehicle would take even longer to navigate the newly cleared but still treacherous roads. She had time to leave a piece of herself behind. She found an old, worn piece of paper on Nathan's kitchen table, a discarded shopping list, half scribbled. She found a pen, its ink barely flowing, and she began to write. She didn't write an apology. Nathan wouldn't accept it. She didn't write an explanation of her wealth or her gilded cage. He wouldn't care. She wrote a confession. She wrote about the emptiness that had driven her to such desperate lengths, the superficiality of her life, the transactional nature of every relationship. Especially with Vincent, she wrote about how his love was a calculation, a commodity. She wrote about the profound loneliness that had led her to create the lie, to escape, to test if anyone would see her, not her money, not her status. She wrote about finding Nathan, about the jarring reality of his existence, the simple, raw honesty of his cabin, the way he moved, the way he worked, the way he guarded his pain like a precious, fragile thing. She wrote about Kate, about the stories he'd shared on the porch, the way his face had softened. She spoke of the courage it must have taken for him to open that wound, to trust her, even for a moment. And then she wrote about Echo. She described the gray dog's watchful eyes, his initial suspicion, his eventual unconditional trust. She described the way he had laid his head on her lap, a silent, profound act of grace. She described the joy in his bark when he saw her stand, the pure, innocent celebration that had paradoxically torn Nathan's heart apart. He taught me what real trust looks like. She wrote, her handwriting barely legible through the blur of tears. He knew my pain, not my status. He saw me, the broken girl, not the paralyzed heiress, and I betrayed him. And by betraying him, I betrayed you. She finished the letter, her hand aching. She folded it carefully, placing it on the kitchen table, weighted down by a small, smooth river stone she found on the windowsill. Then she looked around. There was one more thing she remembered. Nathan's catalog, a worn-out, mud-splattered affair from an outdoor supply store, she remembered seeing Echo once staring at a page. It was a page filled with dog toys, one in particular, a bright red, almost indestructible rubber ball designed for large, powerful chewers. Echo had looked at it with a silent longing. A rare flash of pure, uncomplicated desire in his usually stoic eyes. She had made a mental note of it, an idle thought. Then, now it was a mission. She pulled out her phone again. Another quick, discreet message to Simon. Please procure one large, indestructible red rubber dog ball, best quality for a German Shepherd deliver with pickup vehicle. It was a small thing, a ridiculously small thing given the circumstances, but it was a silent, sincere apology to the only creature in this cabin who had offered her unconditional acceptance. It was a tangible piece of her gratitude and her remorse. She looked at Echo. He was watching her. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." He whined softly. A sound of shared sorrow. Emma sat down on the couch again, her body empty, her mind numb. She just waited. She waited for Simon. She waited for the final, irrevocable end of this strange, painful, utterly real chapter of her life. She waited for the moment she would leave the quiet, the man and the dog she had broken 3 weeks. The world had returned to its original state of silence. The roads were plowed. The sky was a high, brilliant blue, and the snow had formed a deep, glittering crust over the land. Nathan Scott and Echo were once again alone, but the silence was no longer peaceful. It was hollow. Nathan had returned from the woods the day she left, his footsteps heavy, his mind braced. He had found the cabin empty. The air was cold, the fire almost dead. He had seen the letter on the kitchen table. He had read it once, then he folded it, placed it in the small metal box where he kept Kate's letters, and locked it. He had not read it again. He had also found the ball. It was sitting on the rug by the hearth. It was a bright, obnoxious, synthetic, red-looking, garish, and alien against the rustic wood and stone of the cabin. It was as she had ordered, large, heavy, and seemingly indestructible. He had looked at it, his jaw tight, a toy, a token. Then Echo had seen it in the dog, approached it, sniffed it, and nutted it with his nose. The ball rolled. Echo's ears, which had been drooping for days, suddenly perked. He pounced for 3 weeks. That red ball had been the third presence in the cabin. It was the first thing Echo looked for in the morning, and the last thing he nudged slobber covered into Nathan's hand at night. The sound of it, a heavy thump on the wooden floor, a soft whump as the dog caught it, had become the new rhythm of the house. Nathan hated it. He hated it because it was a reminder. He hated it because it was a bribe. And in his darkest, most honest moments, he hated it because his dog had accepted it. Echo, who had been his stoic partner in grief, was now once again just a dog, finding simple, uncomplicated joy in a gift from a woman who had shattered their world. Every time Echo dropped the ball at his feet, his gray tail wagging, his eyes bright, Nathan felt a fresh sting of betrayal. He would ignore the offering, turn his back, and wait for the dog to give up. But Echo never gave up. He just waited, his tail slowing, and nudged the ball against Nathan's hand. A silent, persistent question. Today was supply day. The first one since she had left the drive into town was tense. The roads were clear, but the air in the truck was thick. Echo, who usually sat in the passenger seat, his head high, was in the back, curled up, the red ball tucked between his paws. The small town of Pinedale was waking from its frozen slumber. Nathan parked, pulling his collar tight. He went to the post office, the same small brick building he visited once a month. He unlocked his PO box. Inside the usual pile of junk mail, a new supply catalog, and one thick formal envelope. It was from the Wyoming Regional Bank. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, settled in his stomach. He was late. He was always late. He had been shuffling payments, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Ever since Kate's medical bills had wiped them out, he knew what this was, a warning, the next step toward foreclosure. He shoved the mail into his jacket pocket, his jaw set. He bought his supplies, coffee, flour, dog food. His movements clipped his A. Nassers to the checkout clerk, a low monosyllable. He drove home. The silence in the truck was absolute back in the cabin. He set the groceries on the counter. The air was cold. He needed to rebuild the fire. Echo, sensing his master's dark mood, stayed on his rug. The red ball held loosely in his mouth. Nathan sat at the kitchen table. He stared at the envelope. He might as well get it over with. He ripped it open. It wasn't a warning. It was a single sheet of thick cream-colored paper. He read the dense legal language, his mind struggling to catch up. Pleased to inform you that the outstanding mortgage on property 14 Delta Sierra has been satisfied in full. A zero balance statement is attached for your records. We thank you for your business. He read it again and a third time. It was a mistake, it had to be. He scanned the document for a name, a reason, and he found it at the bottom in a crisp, clear digital signature. Sincerely, Isabel Grant, Vice President Loan Servicing, and just above that in the payment details section, payer of Record Collins Group Holdings. The room went very, very quiet. The blood drained from Nathan's face, then rushed back a hot, prickling tide of pure, unadulterated rage. He shot to his feet, the chair scraping back with a harsh tearing sound that made Echo flinch. Paid. The word was a violation. He slammed his fist on the table. The coffee mug jumped rattling against the counter. No. He growled the word, a low, dangerous sound. She had bought him. She had taken his silence, his pain, his pride, and she had put a price tag on it. She had walked away, and as a final arrogant gesture, she had thrown her money at his problems. She had reduced him to a charity case, a project astray. She could feel good about rescuing with her checkbook all his life as a Marine. As a man, he had lived by a code. You stand on your own. You do not take what you have not earned. His pride was all he had left, and she had just taken that too. He was pacing the cabin, his hands clenched. His breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He wanted to hit something. He wanted to burn the letter. He stopped in front of the fireplace. He looked at the photo of Kate. Her bright, laughing eyes seemed to mock him. "I'm losing it, Kate." He thought the anger so sharp, it felt like grief. "I'm losing your home." The thought stopped him cold. "I'm losing your home." He had been. It wasn't an abstract fear. It was a mathematical fact, slowly his rage still simmering. He walked to the old battered file cabinet in the corner. He opened the bottom drawer. He pulled out the thick folder marked home. He dumped the contents on the table, a cascade of threatening red-stamped envelopes, past due notices, and complex interest statements. He found the original loan document from 2019. He looked at the principal. The number was astronomical. It was a weight he had carried for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. He looked at the interest, only payments. He was barely making the balloon payment that was looming, the one that would have without question destroyed him. He saw the letters from the bank, the ones he had ignored, the ones where Isabel Grant's name was printed, not signed above threats of legal action. He was not losing this place. He had already lost it. He was just too proud to admit it. He sank into the chair, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a hollow, profound emptiness. He looked at the official letter again, paid in full. He thought of her letter, the one in the box. The confession he taught me what real trust looks like. I betrayed him. She hadn't paid him for his silence. She hadn't bought him off, A woman trapped in a cage of money had seen his cage, the one built of debt. The chain that tied him to this land. A chain that was about to be pulled tight by the bank. This wasn't an act of power. It was an act of liberation. She wasn't paying him off. She was protecting him. She was protecting Kate's legacy. She was giving him the one thing she had an abundance of, so he could keep the one thing he had left. As not buying him, she was setting him free. The understanding settled over him heavy and complex. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't gratitude, it was just a fact as solid and as real as the ramp he had built, and just as practical. A soft, wet whump interrupted his thoughts. He looked down. Echo was at his feet. The dog had crept back, his head low, and had gently placed the bright red ball on top of Nathan's boot. Nathan stared at the ball, the garish, ugly, indestructible symbol of her. He reached down his hand, trembling slightly. He picked it up. It was heavy, solid. Echo let out a low, hopeful whine, his tail thumping once on the floor. Nathan looked at his dog, then at the bank letter. He had been set free. He wasn't sure what to do with that, but for the first time in 3 weeks he looked at the red ball, and he didn't feel anger. He just felt the weight of it in his hand. Spring had come to the high plains of Wyoming, not as a gentle arrival, but as a violent, messy thaw. The world, which had been locked in a silent white rigor, was now weeping. The sound of dripping water was constant, a pervasive liquid ticking from the eaves of the cabin. The branches of the pines, the sharp edges of the granite boulders, the snow was receding, pulling back like a dirty blanket, revealing a land that was scarred brown and muddy, but it was alive. Nathan Scott was alive too, though he would not have used that word. He was functioning the letter from the bank. The one signed by Isabel Grant sat on his kitchen table, a constant, silent presence paid in full. The words had haunted him for weeks. He had moved from white-hot rage to a cold, grudging respect, and finally landed on a restless, profound confusion. He was free, his land. Kate's land was truly his, and he didn't know how to feel about it. He was outside repairing a section of fence that had been crushed by the snow. The physical labor was a balm. The rhythmic thud of the post driver, a way to pound his own unquiet thoughts into the earth. Echo was with him. The gray sheppy. Ard was not the stoic, grieving shadow. He had been. The red ball had changed him. He was, in a word, a dog. He was lying in a patch of muddy, thawing grass, his head on his paws, his eyes bright. The red ball, slick with slobber, was tucked between his front legs. He would whine a low, playful sound, nudging the ball, waiting for Nathan to throw it. "Not now, boy," Nathan murmured, wiping sweat from his forehead. Echo sighed a sound of pure canine impatience. He picked up the ball and trotted a few feet away, tossing it in the air for himself. That was when his head snapped up. Nathan didn't hear it at first, he just saw the dog. Echo's body went rigid. His ears, which had been floppy and playful, were now radar dishes, locked onto the main road a mile distant. The red ball dropped from his mouth, forgotten. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Nathan grabbed his hammer. "What is it? Echo?" Then he heard it. It was not the familiar rumble of his own truck. It was not the high-pitched whine of a helicopter. It was the sound of a different engine, a struggling older engine, its gears grinding as it made the difficult climb up his poorly maintained access road. A visitor. Nathan's hand tightened on the hammer. He was not angry. Not like he had been with Vincent. He was just weary. Echo didn't bark. He just stood. His ruff slightly raised, watching a full minute passed. Then an old blue Ford pickup truck, its body pockmarked with rust and its muffler complaining, emerged from the tree line. It was not a vehicle of wealth or power. It was a vehicle of work. It pulled to a stop 20 yards from the cabin, the engine idling for a moment before dying with a sputtering cough. Nathan and Echo stood their ground. The driver's door creaked open. A heavy work boot caked in mud planted itself on the gravel. Then she stepped out. It was Emma, but it wasn't. This was not the pale, terrified, paralyzed woman from the Aspen cabin. This was not the sharp, defiant, well-dressed woman who had faced Vincent on the porch. This woman wore faded denim jeans, a sigh, ample wool sweater, and sturdy boots. Her blonde hair was tied back in a practical, messy ponytail. Her face was clean of makeup, her cheeks whipped red by the spring wind. She looked tired. She looked nervous, and she looked utterly, completely real. She closed the truck door with a soft, metallic click. She did not move toward them. She just stood by the truck. Her hands shoved deep in her pockets as if to prove she was holding no weapons, offering no gifts. Nathan Scott's heart was a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He walked slowly toward her, the hammer still in his hand, a weight for his own balance. Echo stayed at his heel, a silent gray shadow. He stopped 10 feet from her. She looked at him, her eyes clear. She was not crying. She was not pleading. She was just here. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of melting snow, the drip, drip, drip from the eaves. Nathan spoke, first. His voice was rough like gravel. "What are you doing here?" Emma swallowed. I just came to see I can't take the money." He cut her off the words sharp, a piece of shrapnel he had been carrying for weeks. "I won't. I'm a Marine. We don't take handouts," his pride. The last stubborn thing he had was laid bare. Emma looked at him, and she did not flinch. She did not look ashamed. She nodded, as if she had expected this. "I know," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not for you." Nathan's brow furrowed. "What, the money wasn't for you?" "Nathan," she said, taking one small, respectful step closer. "It was for the bank. I didn't give you anything. I took something away from them. They were going to take this land. They were going to take Kate's legacy, and I stopped them." She looked past him at the cabin, at the land, at the mountains. "This place, it's what you said. It's the only quiet left. I couldn't let them. The banks, the world I come from. Pave it over." She looked back at him, her gaze unflinching. "You don't owe me anything you never did. The debt is gone, it's done. I didn't come back for that." "Then why did you come back?" he asked his VO. Ice still hard, but the edge of his anger was blunted. Emma's facade cracked just for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability. "I came back," she whispered to see Echo. The name hung in the air, and the name was a trigger. The gray dog who had been standing at Nathan's heel, his body a coiled spring of tension, heard his name from her lips. He let out a sound, a high-pitched, strangled, agonizing sound of pure, unadulterated joy, a whine of disbelief. "Echo," Emma said again, her voice breaking. It was too much for him. The weeks of confusion, the ghost of his new friend, the red ball, that was fun, but not her. It all broke. He exploded from Nathan's side. He was a gray blur. He did not bark. He did not growl. He hit the end of his self-control and flew across the muddy yard. Emma dropped to her knees, her arms open just as he reached her. He collided with her chest, not with force but with a desperate need, his paws on her shoulders, his face burying itself in her neck. He whined, he cried. He licked the tears that had suddenly sprung to her face. "Hey, boy," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around his thick, rough holding on as he wriggled his tail, a frantic blur, his entire body a testament to pure, uncomplicated forgiveness. Nathan just stood and watched. His hand, still clutching the hammer, went slack, Echo. As if suddenly remembering, his manners pulled back. He ran in a tight, joyful circle, his paws slipping in the mud. Then he seemed to remember one more thing. He ran back to the spot where he'd left the red ball. He snatched it up, his movements quick, and ran back to Emma, who was still kneeling in the mud. He dropped the ball, slick and dirty, directly into her lap. Then he pushed it with his nose, his eyes bright. You're back, throw it." Emma laughed, a wet, broken sound. She picked up the ball. Nathan watched his dog, his partner, the animal who had seen through her lie and then seen through his anger, the dog who had in its simple, honest heart forgiven her completely. He had been holding on to his pride, his anger, his grief like a shield. And the dog with a muddy red ball had just walked right through it. He looked at Emma kneeling in the mud, her face a mess of tears and dirt and joy, her hands wrapped around the toy she had given him. A long, slow breath left Nathan's chest. It was a sound he hadn't made in 4 years. It was the sound of a post being set, of a battle ending, of a long, cold winter, finally truly breaking. He dropped the hammer. The heavy tool thudded softly on the wet earth. Emma looked up, her face frozen, waiting for the verdict. Nathan Scott looked at the woman and at the dog and at the red ball. He was tired. He was, for the first time in his life, completely, utterly tired of the fight. He nodded, a single sharp gesture toward the cabin. "Get inside," he said, his voice rough. "You're getting cold." He turned and walked toward the porch, not looking to see if she would follow. He didn't have to. He heard her footsteps in the mud behind him, and he heard the happy, joyful clicking of his dog's claws trotting right between them. It's a powerful reminder that the most honest conversations are often held without words. This story teaches us that true loyalty is not about finding perfection in others, but about seeing the real aching heart beneath the armor and the lies. Echo didn't just see a flaw, he saw the pain, and he proved that the purest forgiveness often comes on four paws. If this story of truth healing and the bond between a veteran and his dog resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who understands that kind of loyalty. We read every single comment and would truly love to hear your thoughts on Nathan's journey. Your support by subscribing helps us continue to share these tales. Thank you for listening. Our newest story is ready and waiting for you. Just click the video that has just appeared on your screen.